We'd like to welcome you to our third public meeting. We've had 3 meetings so far where we've heard about people who were for and against it. This is not that type of meeting. This is an alternatives meeting to show you if we did go forward, these are the alternatives that we're going to present for taking care of some of the concerns that we've previously heard. So if you would listen to the presentation, and then we can talk about the alternatives and get a lot of input as to how we address the concerns and moving forward. I think you all know Dan Peck now. Erica is new, so this is Erica Quallen. All yours.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you again for coming tonight. Just a quick thing. There's a sign-in sheet as you enter the room.
Make sure
If you do not sign in, please do so we all have a record. If you want additional information, information's there for us to provide. Send emails or whatnot. Thank you again for coming tonight. This, again, as Pauline mentioned, this is officially our public meeting to present the alternatives, which is subsequent to the local concerns meeting that we held a couple months ago. So what we do from the local concerns is we review the comments from the locals. We begin to do our environmental site assessment. For now, we investigate natural resources, cultural resources along the proposed project corridor. And then we come back here to you, present that information that we found from our assessment, and to present the alternatives that we evaluated along the project corridor. So a brief agenda for tonight. Pauline briefly mentioned some of the project team. We'll go over the schedule, where we're at in the scoping study process, a little bit about the project, some history. We'll then present the alternatives analysis, and then what our next steps are after tonight's meeting. And then hopefully we have some questions from the public that we can answer. If we don't have those answers for you, we'll provide input to the town, and they can either relate to you directly or we will relate to you. So project team, obviously the town of Manchester, they're the project administrators through the VTrans MAB process, which is the Municipally Managed Assistance Bureau. VHB, we're the design consultants. I'm the project manager. Erica Quallen is the project engineer for this project. We also have environmental scientists on our staff. We have cultural historic preservation officers on staff, and archaeologists on staff who are doing all the assessments and field reconnaissance for the project. Peter Pochop is the VTrans. He is the FHWA project administrator. He ensures that we're following the correct NAB process moving forward, and the money's being spent properly, and it meets the purpose and need of the project scope. We also have Old Railroad Bed LLC, who currently own majority of the project corridor. And then we've also been getting assistance from Jen Sullivan, who works at the Bennington County Regional Planning Commission. So like I said earlier, we are currently at the alternatives presentation meeting tonight. We held a local concerns meeting in May. So we'll get your input tonight after presenting the alternatives, and then we'll present a more detailed sort of a draft scoping report that we'll present to the public, and then hopefully from that we'll get maybe a few comments, and then we'll finish our final scoping study, which will be presented, and that product will be used for the town to solicit additional public funding or federal dollars to potentially build a project in the future. So a key aspect of a project like this is to identify a purpose and need of the project, and the purpose of the town wants to identify options, potential impacts associated with the development of a path, a more formal path along the old MD&G railroad corridor. There's a need. Currently there's an informal use of the path, but nothing formal, and the town wants to create a public amenity to attract additional use by locals and to attract visitors or tourists into the town. Currently, it can't accommodate bicyclists or anybody who is handicap accessible. So a little bit of project background. There was a feasibility study done back in 2000. Concept path through the old MD&G railroad corridor from Manchester Elementary Middle School to North Road. Piece of that has already been constructed, as you know, from the elementary school to Riley Rink. Right away and funding delayed the the remaining part of the path project. Since then, locals have purchased the corridor, and then currently in the study and design for the remainder of the project.
Dan, can I make one mention? This is online too on the town website on the left-hand side. The presentation is there too, so if anybody wants to look at it afterwards, it's on there as well.
So a little local context for this project. Let's see this laser pointer. Which one is the laser pointer?
The red button.
The red button. So the blue is the Wendy's Way bike route in Manchester. This light pink is the existing path that's been constructed from the school to Riley Rink. And the red is the proposed project corridor from Riley Rink north along the MD&G Railroad Corridor to North Road and Squires Road. And also as context, Vermont 30 is part of the Western New England Greenway, which is a major bike corridor from essentially New York City all the way up to Montreal. And currently it bypasses Manchester City. West Road is part of the Western New England Greenway. So, part of the project would be to, if we could establish this connection where West Road reconnects with North Road up here, then maybe the consideration could be that this would attract more tourists to utilize this existing facility instead of a somewhat dangerous on-road facility that has narrow shoulders, but they could utilize a 10-foot wide multi-use facility. This is a more zoomed in picture of the project corridor beginning at Riley Rink. And this map has been rotated, so we're now heading north is to the right around this gravel area, and then again reconnecting through this field and along the MD&G Railroad Corridor, across Beatty Lane, Mount Elvis Lane, until it reconnects with North Road across from the Squires Road intersection. There are two major stream crossings along the corridor here and here, and then these are two perennial streams that are tributaries of the West Branch Battenkill River, which is over here. And then there's a small intermittent stream crossing right here that we would need to cross as well. So this is a very busy map. So this is part of our Vermont, our natural resource, cultural resource assessment. There's a lot of online maps that are generated through federal and state agencies to map a lot of this natural resource information. We also do an on-field site assessment of the corridor. We have someone go out in the field and review. They take the map, they review it, and confirm if they're confirm or deny the existence of natural or cultural resources along the corridor. So the big thing to take away from here is these are the two stream crossings here and here. There is a state-listed wetlands that encompasses those two culvert crossings. It's a Class 2 wetland, which means it has more jurisdiction, has more federal and state oversight. So anything that we did to impact that wetland would require additional permitting, essentially. It would require Vermont DEC coordination and U.S. Army Corps of Engineer coordination. We also look at rivers and corridors along the project. We also look at if there's any rare, threatened, or endangered species along the corridor. The site assessment and the mapping didn't identify any specific rare, threatened, or endangered species. However, the project is in the potential roosting area of some state or federal protected bats, the northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat. So any tree clearing that would be required as part of the project, which is all in likelihood is going to happen because there are some trees that are growing up in the middle of the corridor. Either additional evaluation or we would have to limit time restrictions for tree cutting, which say we would cut the trees down in the wintertime instead of the spring or summer when the bats would be roosting in the trees. Just a couple more things. We also did a cultural resource assessment of the project corridor. We didn't identify any historic properties directly adjacent to the project. There are some surrounding the corridor, but nothing directly adjacent to the project. And archaeological assessment of the corridor identified that as long as we stay within the railroad corridor, since it already is an impacted corridor along through here, that we wouldn't affect anything archaeologically sensitive if there was ever anything found. Most likely we would be filling over the top of it if we did do anything to the corridor. In short, really the only thing we found out here was a couple of wetlands that would require some, and some streams that would require Army Corps permitting and DEC permitting to move the project forward. So I'm going to hand over to Erica. She's going to go over the concept as we've and identify the alternatives for you. We ask that you please, if you can save your questions till the end of the alternatives review or display, that would be great, and we can hopefully answer them all at once.
Thanks, Dan. So like we said, my name is Erica Quallen. I'm a transportation engineer and planner with VHB. So we're going to be looking up the corridor. We're going to start with the trail, and then we'll kind of backtrack and look at each of the stream crossings individually. We're going to start from the south end. We have the Riley Rink right around here, and then we're going to move to the north. We've got about 6 segments to look at to be able to piecemeal together, look at it in palatable chunks. So it starts connecting from the existing rec trail. We propose that it comes up, and right now people can go on the road, but just to formalize it a little bit, we said let's pull it off of the road, make a little separation. If there are events going on in the field, just get people away from the vehicles. And that can be separated from, with things like trees, boulders, make it look nice still. That would require some tree cutting of the tree line, but it doesn't need a huge clearance. We'll see in the next slide. At the end of this segment, this is where we start to get into some private property. There are 2 segments along the corridor where we need some private property. There would have to be some agreements with easements, but the majority of it is within that existing rail corridor that is owned by the Old Ed LLC. So looking at that section along the road, this is potentially what it could look like, just an idea, so that you could see maybe what it would look like if you could see yourself on that. So you have the road, it's about 20 feet wide, fine for 2-way vehicles going slowly, but it's not great once you have bikes and pedestrians and kids going through there. So we're showing an 8-foot separation, pretty reasonable, something big enough that we could have a healthy tree, but not so big that it takes up a ton of space. And then, like Dan mentioned, we're looking at a 10-foot path through this whole area. There are places where it's going to feel wider, other places where it might feel narrower, but keeping a 10-foot cross-section the whole way through. Continuing north, we just came from over here. This is a continuation of the private property. There's the sand and gravel facility down here, and they have an access road up to a pump station, so that is a place where there will need to be some grading, a little cleaning up, smoothing it out so it's more accessible. And that's the case in a few areas. A lot of it is well established, but there are some areas that it's pretty bumpy, rocky, a little harder to navigate, so that would have to be smoothed out, making it easier for more people to get across. Through here, after that crossing, a lot of this is really well established. It's pretty clear that there is a path that's being actively used through there. More proof that it is actively used is right where this picture is taken from. There is a nice little picnic bench with a beautiful view of the mountain. So there might be opportunities along the corridor. There have already been signs put out with some historic markers and mention of what the corridor was. So there are places like this where there could be more of those, really make it an attraction. So as we start to go up through the field, this is where the official rail corridor right-of-way starts. And from here out there, I believe we are through the private property section. So we are on property already owned right now that is in agreement with this project. So along the field, it's pretty wide open right now. There's some very tall grass over here, and then big open farm fields over here. So we are looking through this area. Trim back the grass, make sure it's not too close, especially with ticks have been terrible the past few years. So keep that trimmed back, our 10-foot path, and then the potential for something like a split rail fence, something nice, so that people aren't running onto someone else's field, but it also stays nice and open. Continuing through, this is the end of that field, and now we start to get into, this is probably the most involved section. We have 2 crossings through here. These are those 2 longer crossings. We'll look at alternatives for those after we get through the path. But this is probably the most densely wooded area. This is a place that a good amount of tree cutting would need to happen. A lot of it right now, 8 feet wide, would need to be widened out a bit through here. In addition to the 10-foot path, you want a little clear zone on the side. You want to make sure it's comfortable for people and you don't feel like you're just on a little trail. You want to make sure you're on a real path through here. So these are some pictures of those crossings. They're about 60 feet across. Right now they're 2 big valleys, and people are kind of diverted down and around at both of these. The existing bridges are totally gone through there.
You keep bouncing your laser light here, and I can hardly see where it is.
All right, sorry about that. Try to hold it up there a little longer. So these are those 2 stream crossings. And what is happening right now is the path is diverting around it like that, instead of going across it since those bridges are gone. And that's happening at both of these. They're going just like that. So we'll look at how to potentially remedy that with some bridges later. Looking at a cross section through here, this is what I was talking about the trees are pretty close, they're pretty thick through here, very much in the woods. That would have to be widened out. Looking through it, there weren't a ton of massive legacy trees. A lot of those were gone since the railroad's been abandoned. It hasn't been quite long enough for the trees to be the 150-year massive trees. So pretty reasonable work through here. But again, some grading that would need to be done, smoothing it out, and then depending on the material you chose for the path, that would be the final layer on there. Looking at this next section, so we are coming out of the woods here, and we are moving up across Beatty Lane. This is a driveway off of Beatty Lane, and we are staying within this right-of-way still through here on the LLC's property. There has been some tree clearing that's been happening a little bit through this area on either side of our 3rd stream crossing. It's a pretty small stream crossing. We'll look at some improvements for that. But since this is right along a private property, there's a building pretty close. We've looked at putting potentially a privacy fence right along there. Something that people on both sides of it, you're still very much in your own space. There's not much going on. No problems with seeing each other's property, having people walking close to your house. And we have this in a few different spots. So we looked at things like a privacy fence in a few different areas where properties and buildings are a little bit closer to the path than they are in other places. A lot of cases have some pretty big fields or have trees on either side. But we are looking at different options. We have the fence along the field here, and then any areas where there are really steep slopes. So some options here. Obviously, they can look a lot of different ways. But if you are looking at more of a privacy fence, putting a real divider in there, you can have something more like you got an angry dog and keep them in your yard type fence, or a 3-rail type fence. And that can happen just at the steep slopes. You just need some physical barrier guided by state regulations on these types of things. They're more like design guidance. If the grading can't work, that you're far enough before the drop off, there would have to be some sort of physical barrier.
Who would pay for it?
That would be part of the design. It would still be on the path in that right of way.
Is this a walking path or a bike path?
What kind of path is it?
More of a multi-use path, be able to use both. When we get into the alternatives, we'll talk about pros and cons of something like an aggregate versus a paved, because that is where something like that comes into play.
Every picture you show, you've got people walking. And if you start putting bikes and people walking there, you have to think for safety or danger of getting hit by a bicycle.
Well, 10 feet is, 8 feet is the minimum for a path with both bikes and pedestrians. Going out to 10 feet was a reasonable balance so that if you went out to 12 feet, then it gets into a lot of extra clearing and grading. In some spots, you would need a lot more fencing along those grades. At the 10 feet, there's still enough room to kind of remedy those slopes.
So you're going to have 10 feet from MES all the way to Riley Rink.
Right now, this section we're looking at is just from Riley Rink up to North Road.
So the MES to Riley Rink will not be.
That's not part of the scope of this project, but that's not to say that it's not
Brian,
part of the
we
future.
only got a grant, the way the state system works, we got a grant to study a certain portion of it. We did actually make it larger than the LLC property by extending it to the border of Riley Rink. But we didn't go all the way in here because we didn't have the funding through the program to do that. But we could look at that though.
Well, I would think that you need to start the path at Riley Rink. You wouldn't start it at MES.
Yeah. The funding that I think we'd apply for through the federal program would probably be from Riley Rink out north to North Road.
Can I ask you, what is the relationship of these to the already existing path? I can walk from Riley Rink down through, over a little bridge, and then go down into the middle of town. I can go all the way to MEMS. So where is that path with relation to
Okay,
those?
sorry. So if you parked at MEMS, you could take the existing path through there across the bridge, and then actually right around there, through the Hosley property that was donated to the town, across the bridge. As you come up through the clearing and take that sharp turn and then go around the soccer field at the rink, if you kept going in a northerly direction, there's a Jeep trail there, and then that's where this piece would take off and go all the way to North Road.
This path would cross, this new path would cross a pre-existing path. Is that what you're saying?
No. It adds on to the end of the existing path.
Because the existing
Maybe we can go back to this.
Riley Rink, it doesn't get to North Road. Right.
So what's
I think this is a good graphic.
yeah. So the path that you're talking about right now from right in the center of town at MEMS, this light pink is what exists currently. It takes you up to Riley Rink, and then the path we're looking at today starts at Riley Rink, and it's this darker pink, and continues up to North Road right here. Does that make sense?
So it cuts into a place where there sometimes is an orange show.
It goes right along the boundary. You can see there's sort of an old Jeep road there, and what they were proposing is to the east of that, cutting back a little bit of the brush. But where the Bluegrass Festival is.
Is this where the
It'd be going
festival's,
along
that
the edge of
field?
that.
This
Yes,
field you're talking
yeah,
about?
that large field.
Right, so here is where the existing path comes in. This is the road into the rink. These are the rink's parking lots right
Solar
here.
panels there.
So this path would start right here, right across the driveway from the existing path, and start by going up right next to that dirt road. And this is that field you were referencing where the festival and art show are. Yeah.
Is Wendy's Way somewhere is parallel to this? No.
So Wendy's Way kind of gives this a big hug. Wendy's Way is all on road. So it goes up Vermont 30, over North Road, and then connects to 7A and back into town. And this kind of goes right up the middle.
So would that part from Manchester Elementary be closed during school?
Could you repeat the question?
And there hasn't been any bicycles on it either.
Pardon?
People riding bicycles on it either.
Yes, they have.
They haven't been advertised through the whole state of Vermont and Connecticut, New Jersey, and Massachusetts about riding their bicycles from Manchester Elementary School.
So the project that we're talking about tonight does not propose any changes to this existing path.
I have one more question, then I'll be quiet.
And then we'll wait until after all the alternatives.
Well, the old LLC portion, has that been donated to this project?
No.
Not officially yet.
Have to be purchased.
There's a couple different things. If you if it's part of a federal project and the town was to purchase it, that would go against the town, what we would be required for a match. And there's been some conversation. It's an LLC, so it's a standalone entity. We've had some conversations with the LLC about actually donating some of the funds back to the town too. But the only way you can count it towards the federal requirements are to actually purchase it, and that gets very complicated because then you got to do appraisals, federal government's involved. So we haven't thought, we know what our options are, but we haven't come up with any landing on how we would do that. Under the federal process, we could end up paying actually more for the land than if we negotiated privately because of the way the appraisal works, but it would still count towards our 20% share. I can talk more about it, but it gets very technical. Anytime you deal with the federal government, things get interesting. Yeah.
So it'd be kind of the next in-between phase. Are these questions about the context of the project? If they're about the actual path, could we hold them until after the alternatives?
Ongoing tax increases to the people of Manchester because
the funding for this project isn't, this is right now, we're just figuring out what could potentially happen. There's still options for different prices and different funding mechanisms that haven't been decided on yet.
I'm talking about on a recurring basis years to come.
Can we
Who's going to do the
wait
maintenance?
till the end until you see the entire presentation, and we will address your question.
I know you asked for questions at the end, but when you're flipping through, when you get to the environmental page, can you read the red writing that's on the field right there? What does that red writing say? And
These,
I'll keep the rest of my questions.
the red and blue ones, I believe, are
The red
wells.
the red is a old Has waste site, I believe.
Oh, okay.
That was recently, it was an old storage tank. It's been removed. It's a non-issue, it's not on the state's, it's an abandoned underground storage tank.
I think that's what we do. Okay. And what's the blue one?
And the blue dots are private wells listed on the A&R.
Thank you.
All right. Make our way back. Very quick trip north. Okay, so getting into the last two segments here. This one, we have Mount Aeolus Lane crossing. So this is another property where there are buildings pretty close, another potential option for something like a privacy fence. This area is another one that's fairly heavily wooded. Some of that tree clearing has happened. As we'll talk, some improvements recently have been done to that smaller stream crossing, and in conjunction with that, there has been some tree clearing, but additional would have to be required to get that 10-foot width. At the crossing here, try to make it as perpendicular as possible, making it safe for people, making it really visible in every direction. Hopefully on a road like this, people are going pretty slow on a dirt road. But there are lots of ways to kind of increase visibility for people on the trail. So all of those options would be explored as things got into a later design. Going through here, this is a pretty straightforward section. As you can see in this photo, wide, flat, well-established path through here. So this would be an area where it's mostly laying down whatever material would be chosen if this were to move forward. Moving into our last section, like I had mentioned up at the field with the view of Mount Aeolus, there are some of these little plaques that talk about what the rail corridor used to be, what it was used for, why you see all of these marble and granite blocks along there. So things like this could really be played up if you want to go for the historic rails to trails kind of aesthetic through this area. And then one last thing that has been recently completed, you can see in this photo, a clearing right off of North Road has been completed, a little area to park for this path, and this provides a nice opportunity for something like a little trailhead information kiosk for people that want to use the path. And going back to the context of this whole project, one of the other connections since if it were to go with the existing trail, goes all the way south to Mems, but then Squires Road is a pretty low-stress connection to get up to the Dorset School also. So connecting a few kind of key things, being able to get from the schools to the rec park to the rink. There are a few big connections that could be made by closing this gap. So this is a lot of text. I will only read what's important, but it is all available online. If you want to be able to take a deeper look at this, you absolutely can. So what we have here is the one with a bunch of nones and zeros. This is the no build, if you leave it as it is. The second one is if you went something with an aggregate, something like gravel or stone dust, something that's not totally solid. And then the last one is a fully paved path. So going from left to right, we're pretty much going from least expensive to most expensive. What we're looking at for the aggregate is about $800,000 to $900,000, and these costs don't include the actual acquisition of any property or any negotiation of easements. That's something that's a pretty unknown, so that would be something that would get added on later based on discussions with property owners. Then for the paved path, it's about $200,000 to $300,000 more to $1,150, $1.15, $1.2 million up there. And a lot of that cost is due to having to come, the mobilization of equipment to get kind of in the middle of the woods, being able to do all of the clearing, taking out a lot of big trees. That's why those costs aren't too different to go from one fairly inexpensive material to a more expensive one.
Can we get copies of that?
Yep, all of this is on the website. Where on the website is it?
Right on the home page, right on the left-hand side, there's something there that says alternatives meeting, and if you click on that, the whole presentation will come up.
Beautiful. Yep, so it's all, it is all available.
Question. Basically, that's clearing trees at the 1 million whatever. Is that the bridge work too?
This does not include the bridges. This is all of the excavating where it's uneven, big rocks that need to be moved, big stumps removed, leveling everything out. With paving, there's multiple layers. You have to have the stone underneath, then pave on top and finish that pavement. Any type of fencing that would go in. If there was some, there's not. That's not what's going to.
Okay, but this is basically then you're just looking at leveling, clearing trees, and this is surfacing.
Yes. And this is for about 1.5 miles.
And it's 1.5 miles.
Yes.
Do all of those materials meet the requirements of the American Disability Act?
So that would have to, for the aggregate, that has more strict requirements. So you would have to find a gravel type or a stone size that meets their requirements. They do exist.
I know they exist, but do they exist in those columns?
Yes, yeah, these costs, it wouldn't change the cost too much to go from gravel to a stone dust, which is ADA compliant. Yeah, absolutely, and that's why a lot of the grading does have to take place, make sure it's not big ups and downs constantly, so it's more easily navigated by.
What materials would be used to build a bridge? You can't put any wood in there.
We're going to get there. Yeah, we're going to run through a couple more lines on here, and then we will talk bridges. So this big section in the middle, these are all your cultural and natural resources that Dan had discussed. A lot of these are nones, some are potentials. These potentials more depend on how far outside of the path you'd have to go. If you had to start looking at the trees more closely, making sure you don't have any rare plants. So those are things we've looked at. They're close by, but we don't know at this level of design if they would be impacted. The one thing to...
It's just the right of way to North Road portion, right?
Correct, yes. Everything that we're talking here today is just that 1.5 miles. And so the last thing in impacts is the right of way. Obviously, if nothing were to happen, there wouldn't be any right of way impacts. But for both of these, there are some private property impacts. even aside from the LLC, there are a couple of areas there would have to be negotiations with property owners. The last thing to note, it's a little subjective, I'll be honest. The aesthetic quality, as I was walking the path, I was personally leaning towards the aggregate. It felt more context sensitive. The accessibility is definitely a thing to kind of think through, because there are accessible materials, but to make sure they're nicely graded, sometimes it takes a little bit more maintenance, more routine maintenance to make sure they're nice and flat. So the paved definitely has some pros there. That's something like the maintenance requirements. They're different, but a similar amount of maintenance. So aesthetic quality is definitely something that's more for you to decide, and that's something that'll happen with the bridges also based on things we'll show. So now we're going to talk streams. We moved from south to north before, and now we're going to move from north back south, mostly because the northernmost one is the smallest, and then the next two have a similar suite of alternatives. So you can pick two different alternatives for the different stream crossings, or if you wanted some continuity between the two, and say we like this design, let's put it in both of them. So this first stream crossing is on that final segment between Mount Aeolus Lane and Beatty Lane. This is an intermittent stream. The few site visits we took, it was dry all of the times, but in big storms, there definitely needs to be some type of structure there to make sure it's not running through the path. What was there when we started this project was this stone and plank little bridge. I'm glad I wasn't there for that site walk. I was here for this site walk. The path is going right up top, and this picture was taken a few weeks ago. So there have been some improvements done here. There is now this corrugated plastic pipe, this culvert through here. Some of the tree clearing, those trees were used to stabilize the sides.
I'm in the middle of the meeting.
And then some stone fill was taken from both sides. Based on this, there were a few recommendations that we had just to improve the stability of it, make sure that it has some longevity. First thing is to add some more fill. The culvert it's not fully supported on every side, so to add some more material in there. And then at either end, add a little bit bigger material, add some of the bigger stones to prevent any type of erosion when streams do come through here. And then on top of the trail, whatever treatment it would be, this is more, the 2,500 shown here is mostly for these two. This third recommendation is based on the path. It wouldn't be laying down gravel if we chose a paved path. That would be putting down pavement on there. So this is a pretty quick hitting. The bulk of it was taken care of when the plastic culvert was put in. So this smaller stream crossing, we've estimated at $2,500. It's mostly getting some fill and bringing it out there. Next one, as we move south, these last two are the ones that are pretty close to that big field after leaving the Riley Rink area. So now we're south of Beatty Lane. We're getting into perennial streams, so there's almost always water flowing through here. As you can see, the existing bridge is no more. There are a couple of lone structures, but they're mostly blocked, and water is moving mostly around this guy rather than going through it. The rail corridor, you can see where it's flat. It used to go right across here. It's about 60 feet of span, but right now, like we were talking about, people go down this really steep grade and back up around. So this is a massive accessibility issue. I struggled. I had to do put the hand on the ground, scoot down for some areas. So this would be a place where you'd really want to restore that crossing area or do some major grading. This last stream, this is the one right after you exit the field if you're going north. Same deal, 60-foot-ish span, no more bridge. What you can see here, those look like broken trees, that was the bridge. There are some old pieces of stone that are laying down here. This picture is taken from about here, looking over, just a pile of stone down here. So very similar crossing to that other one just north of here. So based on these two, we have about 5 alternatives to look at. Some are pretty similar, some are very different, and these range in cost and aesthetic appeal and service life. It's really laying out all of the options for you to think about and see what really matters in these bridges. So looking at these first 3, we have a steel girder bridge. So this would be steel, pretty simple bridge here. The concrete arch is something that would be prefabricated, pretty heavy duty, industrious bridge. That'd be something designed in-house. The abutments on the side that would go into the hills, it's all one big piece. And then with some rails on top. The last one is the metal version of the concrete arch. Looking at these 3, as you can guess just by the material, the aluminum, alternative C, is the least expensive option, but it also has a shorter service life because it is a weaker material. The concrete arch, the opposite. It's the most expensive, but it has low maintenance because it has a really long service life because concrete is super strong.
How expensive? You didn't put any dollars on it.
We're getting there. We got another one of those big tables to look at. We're just laying it all out here right now.
But in the previous study that was done back in the year 2000,
Yep.
they said the span had to be 75 feet.
Yep,
You
so the
said
act-
50. Why?
So the actual gap is 60 feet, and then that extra 15 is your abutments and your actual transition onto it.
And so, has that been factored into this
Yes.
course you're about to give us?
Yep.
Okay.
And then this last one, the steel girder bridge, is essentially what you have on that existing rail trail, that wooden and steel bridge that is on
Right
that
up here,
one.
before south of the break.
Right, yep, right before you take that turn to get by the soccer fields, in between here and the rink. And this one has some pretty high maintenance requirements. The steel isn't super high maintenance, but the deck wears out, making sure that those joints don't get really big, causing big gaps in between the planks. So then these last 2 are kind of the like showy legacy type bridges. And they look like they'd be something really expensive, but they are still cheaper than that concrete arch. These are prefabricated, so these are things that in-house someone would design what it needs to withstand, how wide it needs to be, how tall it can be, how big the abutments need to be. And then the manufacturer would actually build it all, and it would come in just a couple of pieces, trucked out to the site, and put together right there. So in terms of price, these are kind of middle of the road, as we're about to see, and they usually have relatively easy installation, depending on getting out there, since we're talking about in the woods. So something like that prefab bridge, this is based on one of those photos we had looked at. So this is something that maybe you can see out there. Pretty sleek design, blends in nicely with the wood, so something to.
But that will handle maintenance vehicles and construction vehicles?
Yep, so that's one of the things, depending on the access points, if you are coming from 2 to 3 or 3 to 2, whichever one the trucks would have to go over would have to have a higher amount of load that it could take. And that is factored into these costs, is looking at what it would need to withstand if construction vehicles were on there. All of these, regardless, would have to be rated to handle emergency vehicles. If anything happened along the trail and an ambulance or a fire truck needed to get out there, this whole path would have to be accessible for them. But whichever one needed to be crossed by construction vehicles to get to the other would have to be a little bit stronger to handle something. Some larger
Construction
equipment.
vehicles might also be used for maintenance.
Yep, so those
They
would,
would have to handle across both bridges, not just one.
those would likely be smaller, but yeah, they would be rated for at least a fire truck. Yes.
The steel girder bridge is an artifact. It is a part of the history of the rail trail. And just because it would cost more, given the numbers that you're showing us, to maintain it, is not appropriate. It is an artifact. It is part of the history, and it should not be removed.
This is not to remove it. This has nothing to do with the existing
Well, I
one.
thought you showed us the steel girder bridge.
We did. We said that's a potential option for.
I'm saying it is the only option.
This is
Realistic.
these are for two different crossings. This is not anything to do with the existing bridge. The existing bridge is staying in place. We're not proposing any changes along any existing facility. These are on this new 1.5 mile stretch. There are two big streams that need to be crossed. So these are all alternatives for brand new bridges where there's currently nothing.
What are you going to use for access to get to build these bridges and structures?
So the path, that's why part of the 10 feet, it would have to be wider than that. And then depending on different points, if someone from Mount Aeolus could come in and go down to get to crossings 3 and 2, and then potentially use most of the path to get to 1. There is a farm road on the big field if the property owner would be amenable to a truck going there to get to the southernmost crossing. Is that your property?
Well, it's not my property. My family's been there for the last 80 years.
Well, maybe we'll give you a call in a few months.
Don't give me a call.
So that is definitely something that we're thinking about because it's kind of a strange place to have to build a bridge. You don't build a bridge in the woods every day. So there are a few potential options. Most would probably involve some coordination with some nearby property owners. So those would be something we would cross that bridge when we come to it. There's no other choice to use there. But we have built in a pretty hefty contingency into these just to make sure things like that do get accounted for, because more than the design, the actual construction could end up costing more depending on how to get there. So looking through here, so we have our girder bridge, which is the one that's similar to the existing one south of this trail, coming in at $210,000, which has a middle of the road difficulty to build and a middle of the road service life. We're talking 50 to 75 years through here. And then moving over to the concrete arch, a little more expensive, at $330,000, a little over $100,000 more. Very easy to build, comes in one piece, and it lasts a really long time, upwards of 100 years. And this has a very low maintenance need. That pipe arch, the steel or metal version of the concrete arch. The cheapest, again, it's simple to build. That does not look correct. That has a lower, this is actually slightly lower. It is more in the moderate category. It's more up to 75. We'll get that fixed. We'll go on the website. And again, it's one piece, has pretty low maintenance requirements, but it would need to be replaced a little sooner. Getting into the timber, really big prefabricated bridges, they cost about the same, whether you go timber or steel. Just for different reasons. One, the design costs a little bit more. One of them, the fabrication costs a little bit more. The wood one has a lower service life, and the steel one has a slightly higher service life, and both of them require about the same amount of maintenance. As opposed to the path, which has right-of-way impacts on all cases, this we would only need any access to private property during construction. That would be those access points, or potentially having to keep an equipment on the edge of someone's property if it's right near the path, and there's really no way to fit it within the right-of-way if we had to go across someone's property to get to it. That would be something where potentially a temporary construction easement would need to be acquired. All of these permits, they are the exact same as the path, and that is because it's very small down here, but the crossings and the path, they would all be permitted together. This can't happen as two separate projects. They'd all have to happen concurrently so that if you built a path, you could actually get from one side to the other. So they would all have the same permit requirements. And then, it's not bolded on this one, again, super subjective based on what you guys want for your town. for the aesthetic quality of these bridges. They all definitely have values in different regards. So that is something on how to balance these things and where the values lie on here. I will take all questions very, very shortly. Where do we go from here? So out of this, there will be some conversations throughout the town. I'm not sure exactly which bodies, but there will be a selection of our preferred alternative. Preferred alternatives for the stream crossings and the preferred material for the path. That will all be wrapped up together into a draft report, which would be circulated, open for comments. Most likely, it would probably just be posted on the website, something that people can look at, give feedback. And we do have one last public meeting. So that will probably fall between this draft and final. So that's going to be the time for public comment. And say, we read it, we hopefully agree, but would like some little changes. And the whole project is scheduled to wrap up at the end of October. I'll take your questions. Yes. That's why you're here. It's not interrupting anymore.
One of the justifications for this project is to take bicycle riders off the North Road, which is hazardous. And I would agree with that, it's hazardous. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me is that where the path will intersect the North Road is the most hazardous part of the whole trip. It comes in obliquely at the base of a hill that requires about three turns to get from the top to the bottom of the hill. This time of the year, the sun glare is such it's almost impossible to see. Now, if somebody comes out of the bike path, they're going to have to go literally out to the middle of the North Road to see if there's anybody coming from them from the east. So I'm afraid as far as the safety part of it, you're just transferring it to a more vulnerable spot. And
yeah.
Somebody's going to get hurt.
I think that's absolutely valid. There are lots of ways we can go out there, do some assessments to see where potential improvements could be made, where areas for both the cyclists to be able to see vehicles and vice versa.
But all of those things factor into the cost, so you can't do it after the fact.
Some of them do, yes, certainly. And some of them are a matter of putting up some extra signs and lights, which aren't going to break the bank.
From the east, you have all the signs in the world.
And they ride four abreast, they don't ride single file. Even if they know you're behind them, they can run.
Do we have an orderly meeting here where people raise their hands and are recognized?
Excuse me?
Can we have a meeting where people raise their hands?
My dad raised my hand before, but nobody, no.
Okay, sorry, I can't see.
I just have one more quick response to the question. Just one thing on diverting the traffic from North Road. That's definitely a potential from this, but one of the big things was from West Road, bringing people, giving them the chance to get into downtown Manchester, whether that's bringing them onto the Wendy's Way route for a few miles of their ride. But then this is also an opportunity for more of a low stress, bring your kids on their bike type of network. Go ahead.
So I didn't attend any of the earlier meetings, nor did I know this was happening. So my basic question is it a fait accompli that we're going to have this? Or is the town going to have to vote on whether to have this and how it will be paid for?
The way that it would be paid for is very much up in the air. There's a lot of different pots of money. And this doesn't set anything in stone. This is if it were to move forward, there is a clear path forward. When this report is done, it doesn't say a paved path with type C bridge will be built. It says if a future decision by the town to build this path, this is what would be built.
I can chime in a little bit more. The most likely path forward would be that the select board would embrace the report and would put something on the town meeting warning for a vote.
I see.
I'll be honest with you, with the prices, I don't see the path happening. I guess I have a couple thoughts on it. I don't see the path happening as one path, is one project. I think that would probably be phased because I've talked to the state And the amount of money that would be required to build the whole thing would be the lion's share of an entire year of the program that we're trying to utilize, which is the bike pedestrian program. And at the same time, I also don't see the project going forward unless we get federal funding. The federal funding is generally 80% of the project, which is a very large piece. And I know people have said, well, just because it's federal funding, the town shouldn't take it. I do want to be clear, though, the logic of that. If Manchester doesn't take the money, it'll go to Buddington, Rutland, Burlington, St. Johnsbury. So this is federal funding that's out there, and if we pass on it, it just goes somewhere else. It's not like it's not going to be spent. So I do want to be clear on that piece, that just because Manchester takes a pass on funding, it doesn't mean it's not going, you're not going to pay for it either way through your federal taxes.
And the completion of this scoping report study allows the town to seek those federal dollars. This is a document that they can present to FHWA or whoever to receive grants. It identifies to who's donating the money, that the town's analyzed the feasibility of installing this facility. And they've looked at natural resources, cultural resources, constructability, and this document proves to them that this is a feasible project.
Sorry, I didn't finish my last thought. If the select board did embrace the project and put it on the warning, it would need to be voted on by town meeting. Now, a couple of years ago, town meeting voted that any funding requests related to this project would be by Australian ballot. So that means instead of voting on it on Saturday on the floor, it would be Tuesday between 8 and 7, I think, are the hours. And then if it was approved, it doesn't necessarily mean the project would go forward. Then it then would mean that we'd have to get federal funding for it. So I hope that's a little bit clearer. There will be a process. There has to be a process where town meeting would be involved in it. I don't see a way forward to do the project without that. I don't see any path forward for that.
Well, what was not discussed here is, in looking forward, suppose we have it, who will continue to pay for this facility? When the Riley rink moved into where it was, they made a pledge that the town would not have to bear the taxes for that, and they stuck to it. The library, on the other hand, has not. And I don't know how much more the traffic will bear in the future for this kind of thing. So I'm very concerned about that.
We understand that, but I think that's the next discussion that would come when we would have town meeting to talk about if we're going to go forward.
Yeah, I know.
I did want to make sure this woman in the back that had raised her hand before.
This gentleman right here.
This
is all available on the internet. We can print this out?
Yes.
Okay.
It's on the town website. Just go to the first page.
Yeah, Manchester-VT.gov, you'll see a welcome message here and a banner. On the left-hand side, there'll be a series of announcements. I think it's the first one that says Town VHB releases alternatives report. Click on that, and on there you can download the piece. It's pretty front and center.
Yes, sir.
When this Dana Memorial Park was built, the promise was it won't cost the voters a nickel. And I don't know what it costs now. When the library was built,
I understand all those discussions.
when the library was built, then they came to town meeting every year, and the amounts went from 50,000 to 200,000 or so. And I notice on my tax bill, there's a library amount.
So that you were aware of what it costs when you vote for it. Because you vote for it at town meeting, remember? Well, you vote for it in Australian ballot, actually.
Based on this report, it would essentially, as was mentioned before, kind of, it's one step of many, many where a lot of yeses or nos would have to happen. Based on select board input for it to even go on a ballot. And then there would be questions brought to the public on town meeting day. And then based on that, there would have to be, do you want us to go for funding? And then if funding happens, then things become a bit more concrete. So this project is mostly a way of saying, if this were to happen, whether it's in 5 years or 50 years, what would you like it to look like?
Dawn had her hand up in the back,
Yeah.
front door.
So do I understand this right as well? If the town doesn't take ownership of this parcel and it's still in the LLC, they are not able to go forward with the path because it's an LLC, is that correct? Or what happens if it's still in the LLC's hands?
The LLC would be eligible for federal funding. They could do the path on their own. It always exists as a parcel, but I don't see, there's no path forward for an LLC to get federal funding. They may decide to sort of do the piecemeal that they've been doing.
Right, and the right of way of that just goes to the southern end of the field, which does bring you to that road, which is the space it's been operating in currently. Yeah, it would have to happen on a volunteer donation type basis. Yes, ma'am?
Seems like there's a lot of unknowns in the cost for us to be voting on something that we don't really know what the end cost is. And whether or not they're going to get funding, and it seems a little premature that we would want to vote on that, to me.
But we're not voting
I
on
agree.
No, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
I'm talking about town meeting, you're talking about town meeting and voting in that, and yet there is no concrete.
Right, and that's what we're trying to come up with.
Yeah, I'm trying to explain to people, if it did happen, what would be the steps that would be necessary. I don't know if I don't even know if it'll necessarily ever get to town meeting. It's beyond. I should add though, the one thing that I do want to explain, if anybody wants to have a longer discussion about it, we can. If you look at your tax bill, and I do want to explain what we're spending, because everyone points out here, and I think Patrick was talking about what it costs to maintain the parks. If you have a $10,000 tax bill, about $1,700 of it goes to the town, the select board, the town manager, and the rec park, and the police department, and the fire department, the plowing, the paving, not water and sewer. So about $1,700. Of that, about $160 of that goes to maintain town parks. So if your bill is half of that, if it's $5,000, you could take that $160,000, about $80 is going to maintain everything that's down here. So I do want to kind of explain, I'm the tax collector, and it's the most popular title in town, I know. And I collect everyone's taxes, but we only keep about 17% of it. So I do want to explain where the money goes and exactly how much of that is going to maintain, basically the three parks that we own, which is this park, the Town Green, and Adams Park. And that would be rolled into anything that we would be doing as far as a rec path. We really haven't had this discussion, but I think it would be a recreation department asset versus a DPW. It's a recreation asset, but it's also a transportation asset. So we're trying to figure out who would be overall in charge of the path.
I would love to hear your question. Could I put up one thing out there? Yes, you were up next.
Yeah, I just want to make a correction to your presentation.
Yeah?
This path doesn't cross Beatty Lane.
It crosses a driveway on
Crosses
Beatty
our
Lane.
driveway. We own, Beatty Lane ends about 250 feet north of this path.
Yep.
And we own that part too. We also, of course, own where our house is. And it's extremely invasive. People walking across that path. In fact, just the other day, some lady was walking down our driveway, and I went out and asked her what she was doing. She said, I was just curious what was down here. I mean, this goes on. We've seen dogs walk down there.
Bring your shotgun.
It just happens all the time. and it's very invasive. And there has to be a way to tunnel under our driveway or some other way to get across it. It's just not feasible to cross it there. And it's not safe.
I appreciate that. Yeah, along the property, at the driveway crossing, there would definitely be discussions. And one thing to put out there, I do appreciate bringing it back to the actual path. So I do want to make sure we're actually talking about some of the elements of the alternatives, making sure we get feedback on, I really don't want this X bridge, or this needs to be paved for X, Y, Z. I want to make sure we're getting some of that also, so that we know what to be able to bring back to you in a more complete.
Would maybe be helpful, I mean, we can keep taking questions too. I know you've got a question, and Katie's got a question.
We have a couple over here, yeah.
Does it maybe actually make sense to actually talk a little bit about, one of the big decisions is if this does go forward, is whether the path is crushed stone or pavement.
Yep.
Pavement has less short-term maintenance, in my opinion, but then at some point you have to repave the entire path. gravel, we can kind of go in and just clean out a certain portion. And I don't know, if I'd be happy with people taking a poll too and saying if, and again, you don't have to vote on it. If you vote for one or the other, you don't have to say, I'm voting for the path. But I am kind of curious, I have real mixed feelings on both of them.
A question.
Yeah,
Okay, this path, it's 8 foot, 10 foot, I'm a little.
10 feet.
It's 10 feet.
Yep.
It started off maybe 8 foot, now it's 10 foot. Okay, basically, I think, again, I hate fences, especially in Vermont. To put up a visual when you have so much beauty to look at, to me, is an insult. But the thing, tell me what's going on this path. Is this just for bicycles and walkers? Is it for motorbikes? Tell me where you're drawing the line.
I can talk a little bit about this. So right now, it's up to the private property owners on what they want to allow and not allow. I've said all along that my recommendation to the select board is that the town has an ordinance that actually governs town parks, and that we'd actually amend that. We'd have specific rules for it. I'm not in favor of motorized vehicles at all, except for law enforcement and emergency vehicles. One of the things that does come out is if it's a crushed stone path, then you're sort of limiting yourself to cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in the wintertime. You wouldn't plow it. If it's paved, you would have the option of plowing it and jogging out there in the wintertime. It seems like a large cost. But I do want to make it clear there's a couple things that I would want to see in an ordinance. And again, I would draft it, but it doesn't necessarily, I don't get a vote. And you have probably more influence over it than I do. I would want to see it sunrise to sunset. I'd want to see no motorized vehicles. I'd want to see dogs on leashes. And I'd want to see no alcohol.
What about skateboards?
I haven't thought that far ahead. Yeah.
if it was aggregate.
So we're just building to have you take a tour out.
Obviously, an aggregate path could accommodate skateboarders.
Rollerblades.
Or rollerbladers. Obviously, an asphalt paved path would be able to accommodate those two vehicles.
With a town ordinance though, right now, for example, if somebody was out there on a motorbike and the owners didn't want it, they could be asked to leave, they could be charged with trespassing, but there's nothing there. With a town ordinance, you actually could write a ticket and actually find somebody. They could be arrested actually if they were a perpetual violator.
Yes, sir.
Well, addressing the issue of the surface, I'm starting to think more that the aggregate is really the choice. I like it. I like what you said, it goes with the environment. I think it's easier to maintain. You don't have the buckling and the braking that's possible with a blacktop. So that's my choice. You would ask for opinions on that. So if anybody else has an opinion on what they think it should be.
Yes?
The enforcement to all these rules and regulations that you are suggesting that we adopt, who's going to enforce it?
Right now, the town ordinances, so each ordinance has to have an enforcing officer in order to be valid. There's a bunch of different enforcing officers, but it's anywhere between the police officers to what we call a municipal compliance officer. What's that?
That's 1.6 miles.
Yep.
You would have to increase the police force.
Now, I just deputized you, Sylvia.
You wouldn't expect the property owners to do it though?
No, but I always tell people if there are people breaking rules, I would expect that they would call the police department would go out and enforce it. I think the one big thing on this path is dogs on leashes. We do have a rule here at the park, it is enforced. We actually have had people that have repeatedly refused to put their dogs on leashes, and we've gotten a restraining order for a year and thrown them out of the park.
I'd just like to say one more thing. Having moved from a house where I had a tremendous amount of traffic in front of it, was very unnerving, was very unsafe. My house was robbed a few times, okay? And I was in an extremely good neighborhood. But when you have a lot of traffic in front of your house, it's a whole different living situation.
Does anyone else have thoughts on the
surface?
On the surface of the...
Can you do me a favor and just go back to the picture you had up there before? Well, not the other one where you had the vista of the farmland. And that's my area of concern. And personally,
This guy?
No, you haven't found it yet. It was just, you had it up for about 15 minutes there.
It's, I think, in the
No,
beginning.
well, yeah.
That's where the big field
We
is.
have the big field and the mountain in the back.
Right, we have the little version of it.
Yeah, there's a little bit. The other one points out what I want to bring up a
What's
little
your
bit
first
more.
slide?
Keep going. It's somewhere.
Oh, it's on the
That's the
opening.
first one, I think it's the kickoff picture.
It might be the kickoff.
No, there it is, there you go.
No, but that's one of them.
Is the one up here?
Yeah, but that still doesn't quite do it. There's another one. But anyway, my point, as I say, Mother Nature did most of it, but I've been responsible for the last 60, 70 years keeping that land looking the way it is. And I do have some concerns about this whole thing. I will say, if you ask me what you should have for a path surface, I will tell you, it should be grass. There's nothing more beautiful, more easy to walk on, anything than grass. But that's not my concern. My concern is, if that other picture you had up there, you saw a groomed field on the left, and you saw a groomed field on the right, and right down the middle, you saw a path that was 60 feet wide, probably, I think it's 60, maybe it's 80, and it's growing up to weeds. And that picture is probably 2 or 3 years old.
Find that picture, you can find that.
Yeah, because right now,
Just yell when I'm there.
there's a couple of trees growing there that are probably 20 or 30 feet tall. And the reason I'm a little concerned about that is about 20 years ago, we went to the work of taking out stone walls, trees, filling in where that railroad track was, making that one 34-acre field. Now it's 2 fields, one of them's 30 acres.
Right there.
Is it?
That's it.
Oh, it's the last slide, not the first slide.
Okay, sorry about that. But you see, that's a few years old, and
Yeah.
already you've got a spot there that is growing in, and it looks worse than that now. And you've got a nice path down the middle. It's probably 4 feet wide, and it's green grass, and it's very pleasant. But either side of it looks like hell. I'm sorry, it does. And this is my concern. I offered, when I was doing the work on either side, to come right up to that path and make the land the same as it was everywhere else, and no cost. I said I was doing the work and I would do it. And nothing was said or done, and I was told to keep off from that piece of property. So I did, but it's already growing up. And as a farmer, we don't like hedgerows. We like trees, but we don't like hedgerows. We want them out of there. And that's why we took them out. I have to live with the fact the path is there. I'm not saying it's good, it's not bad, not my preference, but it's there. It's a thing that's going to happen. But I do have concerns about liability, about security, about people coming through there. I will admit, I've seen a fair number of people walking the path when I'm working down there, so it is getting some use. But I do have to wonder, is it a really good investment for the community, for the amount of money? I mean, are we getting 100 people through there? Are we getting 1,000 people through there a year? Are we getting 20 people through a year? I don't know. And the thing of it is, I'm not really a taxpayer of the town, but that land has been my family since 1940. So, I grew up on that land, and that land means a lot to me. It really does. And I don't want to see anything destroy that land.
I think I had a meeting with the Haddons.
Yes, you did, yes.
And I thought it was a really good meeting. We talked about the agrarian nature of the property, and, it's gone back to General Roberts, all that land down there.
Yes.
So we're trying to find a way to get access for you to both sides. And at the same time, keep the bikes out of your business, but also maintain the area like you were talking about. And we have different maintenance equipment. We probably will, I'd like to actually limit that area, because we're talking about a 10-foot path here and an 83-foot right away. And I'm always in favor of, I think we're running out of farmers.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be doing it much longer. But I mean, if you get it put into production, it'll be taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about that. What is 500, 600, 700 foot stretch? Which so get it done, do it upright, and have it done. And I will tell you that when a few years ago, several people commented on how beautiful that field was, because it came in naturally with yellow mustard. I mean, I didn't put it in there; it just came in. But people, and you wouldn't believe the number of people that were out in the field just running and galloping in it and rolling in it, taking their dogs out in there. And I'm fine with that. But what if somebody goes out there and I have a piece of machinery out there and they get on it, they get hurt? I'm liable. The Haddons are liable. The town isn't liable. And all they got to do is go to 30 feet either side or 40 feet either side, and they're on private property. And I guess my concern is that the people that are adjoining this land have not really been considered the way I'd like to see them considered. I think there's still a lot more conversation that has to be held before this goes through. I know you've had some good discussions with the Haddons, and they told me, and they asked me to come because they couldn't come tonight, but and they were quite pleased with what you've come up with, but you're still not there.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers. I mean, we talked about like page fencing, for example.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
We're trying to put something in there that looks agricultural. Split rail is not agricultural, so there's different treatments here. But also, in order for you to make a go of both sides of the field, you're gonna have to have good access from front to the back.
That's right. Yeah. But when I was a kid, I used to run that railroad. The trestle was still there. We crossed the trestle. We weren't supposed to, but we did. It was an old wooden trestle. The thruway was still there with all the beautiful marble slabs, and they've all gone either buried or whatever. But I appreciate people wanting to see the beauty of that land because it is absolutely gorgeous down there.
One of the things that when I walk out there, there are several different types of ecology out there.
Yeah.
You've got the land that's being farmed, and then you've got hardwoods and softwoods. You've got some river areas, and I've been on some paths where every mile seems like the last mile. And this is unique, but one of the things that makes it unique is that field, and then you have the beautiful views of the mountain from there that you don't have on the rest of the path.
Yeah. And the other concern I have is that over the past couple of years, I put a fair amount of material on that land to bring it up to the point where it's producing, and I got accused of not knowing what I was doing. I mean, I've been farming for 70 years, and I was accused of not knowing what I was doing, that I was polluting the bat and kill and putting stuff on the property that I shouldn't have been putting on there, which was absolutely false, because what I was putting on there has been approved by the state of Vermont and the state of New Hampshire for agricultural purposes.
The pulp, right?
The pulp and the others, and it's been approved. Anybody that wants to can look up RCI and find out the stats of it. It does smell. I will tell you, it smells for about 2 weeks, but I can't help that. If people want to walk the path, I do have the right to spread that on either side. And I apologize if it offends some people, but that's what it is.
They grew up right around the corner from a dairy farm. And at a certain time of year, it was unbearable.
What I spread,
that's agriculture.
What I spread doesn't begin to smell as badly as the stuff that comes out of these pits that they spread for 2-3 weeks in the spring. I mean, you can't even go. I can't even go by them. So anyhow, I guess that's what I
appreciate the feedback. Do we have any? Yes, back in the back. Go ahead, ma'am. Yeah.
So just to get back to
yes, please.
Final costing, this and that. So we're looking at least for a cost of just doing the project of over $1 million between the bridge work and the dirt work.
Yes.
Excavation. And then on top of that, we still have a price tag on purchasing the property?
That is correct.
Okay, do we have any idea, John, what that would be?
It would be, right now, the most recent figure I have, I don't want to give an exact figure because then people will say that's the exact figure. It'd be a little over $125,000, I think, is the current number for the purchase of it. Now, if we went with the federal program, we'd have to buy it at fair market value, which could be less than that. It could also be more than that. So that would depend. And if it was $1 million project, for example, the town would be responsible for $200,000 of it. And again, I want to be clear, with a small town and with the numbers we're talking about, I don't see the project being able to complete the project without federal funding. And it's the same thing as we did on Depot Street, by the way. It's the same program, 80-20 mix.
Which took us 3 years.
Yeah, it took us 3 years.
3 grants.
Yes, sir.
Can we look at the bridges?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No.
We had 2 last hands up that I was going to take and then switch over to the bridges, unless these are about bridges. Go ahead.
I have like 5 or 6 questions or comments. I don't know if
Can we start with 2 of them?
Okay. For the field section, and you're talking about fencing, you had up there, you didn't really have any alternatives, you just had alternatives for the privacy fence when you got into the populated area. As Mr. Bryan indicated, we prefer to see page wire fence rather than split rail because it'll keep people off of the property.
Totally fine.
We would also like to have some sort of consideration about what's happening with the other 70 plus feet of the railroad right-of-way. If you're talking 10 feet and another couple of feet on either side for mowing and things of that nature, there's still 60 plus feet that would prefer to see an agricultural use, and like Tim said, save you some money of coming out and clearing out trees and mowing on a regular basis if somebody can keep that in agricultural use. Going on to my second one, there's some significant portions of this trail bed that is raised. If you're going to widen it to 10 feet, you're going to talk about significant amount of fill to bring that out to 10 feet. It's about 6 to 8 feet wide now. And then when you slope it, you're talking about significant amount of fill. So have you factored into the cost of this? You're talking about trucking in. How are you going to truck it in? Are you going to, realizing that you're going to be trucking one way, dump a load, get that truck out of there, bring in another truck, dump? So you're essentially, probably quadrupling your fill time just by the fact that you can only bring one truck in at a time. You might be able to park a truck somewhere along the field while another truck passes it, but you're going to have a significant increase over a normal fill operation.
I can tackle the first couple.
Yeah.
Cage fencing would be my ideal fencing
Yeah.
in most locations. I think, one thing we have to think about is maintenance. But anytime that we're talking about fencing on adjacent property owners, I would give that a lot of weight. And then as far as farming the land, I think the comments I made earlier as far as how we're able to formalize that, because we might be using federal funding to buy it, it would be harder to try to transfer that or provide rights of way. I don't know if there's management agreements that we could have where
Maintenance agreements.
we could have a maintenance agreement with the abutter saying, basically you can maintain it by farming it. I think that's a great way. I think most people that are using the path, most people, I'd say 99.9% of people using the path would like to see something growing next to it that's useful. And then on the grading, I think some of it might be taking down the existing grading a little bit and flattening it out too.
Yeah, and we are carrying a pretty hefty mobilization cost in here, which accounts for that trucking back and forth. In a lot of places where we were out there, we were measuring the widths, and a lot of places we were getting enough width for it. So there would be a few sections definitely where there'd be a good amount of fill. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to comment on two things. One, that the more natural the materials that can be used, would be my preference. I think people love to take walks in the woods and not on paved highways. The other thing is to take a longer view on this. We're taking a very short view, a lot of people. And if you travel to any tourist mountain location, you're going to find trails all over that the towns have supported. And we are so far behind most of our competitors. This would be a tremendous asset over the long term. And I look out at this rec center and someone says, well, it's costing us a lot of money now. It's bringing money into this town, what's happened to this rec center. What I've seen happen here in the last 20 years is incredibly encouraging. It's a lively, active place where people are recreating and enjoying the outdoors here in Manchester. We don't have enough of that. And we need to look to the future and see what we're offering our residents and our visitors and recognize that brings income and people into this town.
Thank you, I appreciate that. One quick follow-up, you said the more natural the material, the better. So that's pretty clear cut on the path, but something like the bridge.
The more wooden, the better.
Okay.
Those concrete ones.
Cool.
I think the two gentlemen over here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I is totally against paving. I think that would be ridiculous, and I like the natural material if it comes to that.
Thank you. And same for the bridge, something more wooden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The
Great.
bridge over the bat and over the West Branch, going from here to the Riley Rink is fine.
Cool, thank you. Yes, sir.
So I would agree that the natural material is better. I have some experience in both Stowe and Morrisville. Stowe has a paved bike path. I have a business there and spend a lot of time on that bike path and other trails in that area. Likewise in Morrisville, which is the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, very similar to this, that's an aggregate path. I think the aggregate path, which incidentally goes right by our business, it's super vital. People out there all the time. Goes by the business. It's a natural surface. It seems to disappear a bit. So I think that's terrific. I would echo Katie's response. I mean, if you go to either of those towns and ask the citizens, hey, you know, what's important in your town? They're going to say those trails are important in the town. So with total respect to people who are being, have this trail going through their property, I totally respect that and their opinions. But ask the general citizenry in either of those towns what's important, it's the trail.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, then we'll come over to you.
Yeah, let me just clarify one question about the funding. So if at the town meeting, the people vote to go ahead with this, then the town would have to purchase the property for $125,000 plus whatever before they go for federal funding. And if you don't get the federal funding, then the town has laid out that money and is kind of stuck with that with no money to develop it. Is that
That would be part of the whole grant process.
I'm sorry?
That would be part of the whole grant process. It would say, if we got the grant, we'd buy the property.
Oh, you don't have to buy the property
No.
until you know you got the grant.
Right.
So you can apply for the grant even though you don't own the property.
Right.
Yes.
They
With the
give us
assumption
the
that
money,
you will then
we
own
will
it.
then own
In
it.
part of your grant, some of the part of the money that you would ask for would be going towards buying the
One
property.
possible funding source, and again, this is, I don't use this saying very often, but when you talk about the select board in town meeting, that is above my pay grade. Both of those, I get to vote at town meeting, that's about it. One of the possible funding opportunities would be to use the CERC fund, the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund that we have. If town meeting authorized use of that, then that would mean that we would set aside money in the fund, but if the project never happened, so we wouldn't have to go out and borrow money or tax money in order to pay for our portion of it. But the $200,000 or so that we'd be expecting to put up, that's a good chunk of money out of that fund too. The fund's about $1 million right now.
So the one over here, I promised him next, and then we'll come back over to you.
In terms of the bridges, the remains of the marble box culverts are industrial archaeology, but the only bits of the railroad that will remain. So I would say any bridge that is as less invasive on them, anything that's lightweight and not heavy concrete and not anything that destroys what's down there, and avoid the heavy culvert, monster culvert look and stuff. And I think wood, steel girder, or something that's, I think, an old railroad flat car, because they...
We did investigate it. We had heard about this. You must have been the one that brought it up previously. I really appreciate that. When I was out there on the sidewalk, I was standing looking at all of the marble a lot. My brain was turning in ways to use it. Even some of those kind of markers are at the trailheads. They could make great bases for some historic plaques, things like that. Play up the character.
I think Bill was next.
He was next, and then we'll come back over to you.
Just commenting on the surface material, potentially. The existing path around that circles this rec area, I presume would be similar to that, what we refer to as pressure run aggregate or something. And that path in the rec area, I think, has been 10 years old, and I think we resurfaced it for the first time this year for less than $5,000 for a mile, including the additional new material. So it held up well. I think most users of the path, this is probably one of the most consistently used facilities in the rec area. It's a little easier on the feet than asphalt. And if push comes to shove down the road, you decide, or the town decides, whoever owns it, that they want to add asphalt later on, that's easily done, because this just acts as a good sub-base for it. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we knew that the aggregate doesn't preclude, if it were to become something that's a bigger network, I think of the Stowe path, that it's quite a bit longer. So if something does happen like that, totally agree. Thank you. This woman right here had one, and then we'll go back to you.
Hopefully we're going toward the end of this tonight. It's been a long, but I'd like to make
We
one
sure can be.
suggestion. The next time, for people like me that don't hear as well as we should, I wish you'd use a mic if there's any other meeting coming up.
Okay.
I lose a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there may be a couple others that might.
I appreciate that feedback. That is definitely something we can get set up for next time. My mother tells me I'm loud, but yes.
I just want to kind of add to what Bill was saying about you have resurfaced this part, but from the basketball court to probably the bridge, that I don't think has been resurfaced in many years, and it could use resurfacing because there are some areas that accumulate a lot of water when we get heavy rain, icy in the winter time. A lot of people do access it.
Is this Citizen Dawn or
Yes.
Men's Dawn?
However you want to take it.
Okay. Point taken. Yes. Point.
Yes.
I'd like to add that during the 2 Town Street Fests this year, the Bike Manchester group, which supports this project, we talked to dozens of people who stopped by our tent and talked to us about this path. They were probably fairly evenly split between residents and visitors. And the enthusiasm was tremendous. They couldn't wait to get on this trail.
Yeah. That's great to hear. It's hard to get the read of the town proper and people who use it potentially. You can only get so many people to show up. So I appreciate hearing that.
Can we, I'm just kind of curious, this is a self-selecting group, so it's not a scientific poll, because you've decided to come here. Who's in favor of crushed gravel? The crushed gravel, like
crushed stone
versus
unpaved, we'll call it.
Yeah.
And paved.
And paved.
And who doesn't want the project?
Who doesn't want the project?
Who doesn't want what?
The project.
Patrick, we already put you in that category. You and your cell phone. That was my wife. Oh, okay.
And then one last kind of read, similar type deal on the bridges. One last question, I swear. Something that kind of looks and feels like the existing bridge between here and the ring, something kind of wood or steel in favor. The other option is going to be like a concrete or heavier steel.
I do have one question.
Yes.
I wondered if you could do a study on the traffic coming in and out of Squires Road, because you have 6 days a week. You've got tractor trailers, dump trucks, trucks with trailers behind them. And this is the area that you're going to have people crossing, with bicycles and children and so on. And you have all of that traffic going up and down Squires Road, and it's a lot.
I can look at, there is traffic counting technology. I can look into it. I just have to, BCRC is the one that kind of does those kind of traffic studies.
And we can look at the data. We also have the people. I'm
Yes.
also a traffic engineer.
Yes.
I
There is
study
stuff
this
out
thing.
there.
So by looking at that, it's actually a really convenient way to see the traffic on North Road as well as who's on Squires Road. So we can get an idea of
I don't think
what people would
traffic
contend with.
usually, that's a class 2 roadway, North Road.
Yeah.
So usually they're class 1s.
I don't think the RPC would, but we could, if you do morning or evening, which is peak.
Okay. I can look into it. There is a way to
We
do
might
it.
be able to. Yes?
Can you show the slide again that shows the bridges and how long they will last?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to note, there is one little error. This pipe arch is actually a moderate. It says 5, but it's moderate. It's 50 to 75 rather than 75 to 100. One little, that will get fixed before it goes up on the website.
Pictures of the bridge back up the verse.
Yep. We're gonna let some digesting happen here, and then this one was asked to be brought up, so I'm gonna show this one for a little, and then we'll go over to the photos. Yeah.
Has there ever been a cost-benefit analysis or any idea how many people might use this and what percent they might be local? as opposed to the cost?
We have not looked at that at this point. It's hard to tell when something informal becomes formalized. You don't know people that would use it but don't right now. Maybe those big stream crossings are a barrier, various things. We haven't at this point.
I can pull some up. There are actually nonpartisan, I'll call it, groups that do studies on bike trails as far as benefit and impacts, like the National Planners Association, Federal Highway Administration. So there are some groups that, I mean, I'm always careful in today's day and age with Facebook of like, you know, I always analyze the source of my information really carefully before I jump on it.
APA is a great resource.
Yeah. So there are some out there that have done good studies on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do some like scaling and interpolating. They'll say a community of this number of people with this average tourist would generate this much traffic, and this one. So a lot of times it's hard to find what fits perfectly, but you can get a range from some places, but we have not yet. Yes?
This is for John. So if this project goes through and we bring all these new visitors into our town, all that additional money, my property taxes are going to go down?
I will say this, and nobody likes to hear this. Manchester's municipal tax rate, everybody listening, is actually among the lowest in the state. We're usually about 17, 18, 19. So our tax rate is about 26 cents. Stowe's tax rate's over 50 cents per 100. I know. That's why Glastonbury is why I am. We also compare to Glastonbury and Mount Tabor.
I bought a house in the wrong place.
Yeah, I know. Our taxes are actually very low. But our assessed values are also really high too. So I can't answer the question because we're probably going to go to your house, find all the improvements that you and Susan have made, and then raise your assessed value. That's what
I understand that Liac access road. There's no fence to be there.
Yes.
You know, there's nothing to block off the traffic and the people. You know what? That's not even paved. We probably get 3,000 people there.
How many?
Maybe 3.
It's got a lot of time.
I want to just get back to this gentleman. This will be our last question. If you have anything, come up after. You wanted to look at the bridges. Did you have anything to comment on?
The other ones that were...
Then there are these guys.
Okay, so the one on the left is kind of like the one that's near here.
Yep, yours is just a longer span.
Right, and that's probably relatively inexpensive to build.
Yep.
With a little bit of woodwork on the sides, looks nice. The other two, I wouldn't choose.
Yeah, me neither.
The all wood one would be nice, but...
This one is the least expensive. The concrete is the most expensive. And then...
C or A is more than C, right?
If anybody has
by a little bit,
questions that they want to ask, the folks are going to stick around afterwards too.
Yes.
So if you had a question you wanted to ask, but you don't like speaking in public, or you had a specific question about your property or anything like that, we're going to stick around here for a little bit.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure you hit up our sign-in sheet. Make sure we have information so that we can let you know when our next meeting is.